Well, it looks like Moscow has gone too far. Azerbaijan has requested Turkish military bases on its territory amid the scandal over the detention of Azerbaijanis in Russia and the growing confrontation between Baku and Moscow. In Azerbaijan, there have been serious and public calls for the creation of a Turkish military base in the country amid the diplomatic crisis with Russia. And notably, the president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is already going on an official visit to Azerbaijan tomorrow, July 4th, including to discuss this idea. It is noteworthy that if Turkey establishes a military base in Azerbaijan, it will become the first NATO base on another side of Russia, now from the South Caucasus. And against this backdrop, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs suddenly started talking about how the conflict is going too far and that it's time to simply make peace. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that the relationship between Russia and Azerbaijan is of a strategic alliance nature, which, quote, causes resentment among certain forces and a desire to hinder the partnership between Moscow and Baku. Well, as you can understand, they're saying that it's some external forces that want to drive a wedge between Azerbaijan and Russia, not Russian law enforcement brutally killing Azerbaijanis in Russia. My name is Alexei Pechi. Today is July 3rd. According to the calendar, let's discuss this topic, which is quite interesting and revealing. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, leave any comment you want, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as it comes in. So, Eldar Namazov, the former head of the presidential administration under Heydar Aliyev, the father of the current president of Azerbaijan, has publicly called for the creation of a Turkish military base in Azerbaijan amid the diplomatic crisis with Russia. And, by the way, he's not the only one calling for this. In the Azerbaijani public sphere, more and more people are saying that it's time, as they say, to bring NATO troops into the country so that the Russians don't even dare to make a move against them. By NATO troops, they refer to a Turkish military base, as Turkey is a NATO member. Namazov stated that Baku is facing increasing pressure from both Russia and Iran, countries he described as posing a direct threat to Azerbaijan's sovereignty. There is indeed pressure now, especially from Russia. The situation with Iran is clear. Iran is attacking Azerbaijan because of its ties with Israel. It's important to note that such calls appeared after the death of two Azerbaijani citizens on June 27th during a Russian police raid in Yekaterinburg, an operation that Baku called an ethnically motivated killing. This act of violence by Russians provoked a cascade of retaliatory steps from Azerbaijan, including the arrest of Russian citizens, suspension of bilateral cultural exchanges, and the closure of Russian media offices in Baku. Moreover, Azerbaijan is now planning to completely close Russian-language schools, or more precisely, to completely abolish education in Russian. And today, Namazov says, quote, "In the near future, it is necessary to make a decision about placing the largest Turkish military base in the region, in Azerbaijan. For the neighbors who don't understand, part of this base will be enough to serve a population of 250 million people. It can even be leased to our other ally, the Pakistani Air Force, which possesses nuclear weapons." As you can understand, this proposal reflects a shift in sentiment within Azerbaijan's strategic community, where more and more voices are calling for Ankara to play a more prominent role in ensuring security, in general in the South Caucasus. Azerbaijan clearly felt that now is the right time to apply pressure. And Turkey's role in the region has noticeably increased after the war in Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020. Well, and Iran is still in conflict with Baku over transport corridors and the defense ties between Israel and Azerbaijan. It is telling that Ilham Aliyev himself publicly states that the idea of a permanent Turkish military base on Azerbaijani soil is still premature. Aliyev in this context recalls the Shusha Declaration of 2021 signed by Turkey and Azerbaijan, which includes a provision on mutual military assistance in the event of external aggression. Moreover, it is clearly stated there that there are two nations, one army. Such a phrase means, well, Azerbaijanis, if it is necessary, will fight for Turkey and Turks will fight for Azerbaijan. At that time, Azerbaijan ended up under the direct military protection of a NATO member country. But, as I say, there is a public side and there is a non-public side. For example, it just so happens that while Aliyev says no, there will be no military base, but it just so happens that tomorrow, July 4th, the president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, will visit Azerbaijan. Officially, Erdogan will take part in the 17th summit of the Economic Cooperation Organization, which will be held in the city of Kankendi. But it's obvious that Aliyev and Erdogan will, of course, discuss both the issue of tensions between Baku and Moscow and the question of increasing Turkey's influence in this region. And here, a more than telling moment has emerged. Today, after a whole wave of threats against Azerbaijan from Russian propagandists, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that it's time to make peace. The press attaché of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mashka Zakharova, suddenly stated on propagandist Solovyov's broadcast that the relationship between Russia and Azerbaijan is of a strategic alliance nature, which causes certain forces to feel resentment and a desire to disrupt the partnership between Moscow and Baku. We must not allow this to happen. There are problematic issues in interactions with every entity, whether it's international relations or private life. The question is how to solve them. There is a profound meaning in Russian-Azerbaijani relations. This is our historical period of unity when we were part of a single state. This is a deep history of our interaction, context between people, and the historical challenges we have overcome together. Well, it's telling that on Azerbaijani television they are talking about exactly this, but in a completely different context. In Baku, they remind Russians that it's time to forget about the Soviet Union and about the fact that Azerbaijanis were once forcibly incorporated into the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and that's why there can be no talk of any historical ties. Azerbaijani television directly tells Russians to use their brains and understand that Azerbaijan has been an independent state for over 30 years. There's no such thing as the Soviet Union or any historical community. Everyone has forgotten about it. This country has changed completely. Don't even consider it. However, Moscow's concerns are now quite clear. Initially, Russians demanded punishment for Azerbaijanis, but as the situation escalated, they started calling for peace. And the very possibility of Turkish or NATO-related military infrastructure appearing in the South Caucasus is a sign that Russia is finding itself encircled. Back in 2021, when Ankara and Baku were signing the Shusha Declaration, the Kremlin stated that any attempts by Turkey to establish a base in Azerbaijan would cause particular concern and would require measures to ensure Russia's national security. But now it's 2025 and Russia simply doesn't have the strength to close off yet another section of the border. That's why shouting now about ensuring national security is kind of pointless. The Kremlin just can't handle it. But will these appeals from Moscow stop Erdogan? Most likely no. Moscow's concern and fear are especially acute right now, considering Turkey's NATO membership and its increasingly assertive foreign policy, including its growing military presence in Syria, Iraq, Libya, and the Caucasus, and now also in Azerbaijan. Such a move would completely reshape the regional security map, clearly not in Russia's favor. From what we can already observe today, Turkish military advisors are already closely cooperating with Azerbaijani forces. Since the war in 2020, joint exercises have simply become a routine matter. Ankara's defense industry, including the sale of drones and technology transfer, has become a key pillar of Azerbaijan's post-war military modernization. Moscow did not respond and is unlikely to be able to. But there are also indirect signs that Erdogan is about to push Putin out of yet another sphere of influence. Let me remind you, not long ago Erdogan hosted Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan in Istanbul. This is a signal that Turkey sees itself as the central political mediator in the region, completely pushing Russia out of its traditional role. And now Azerbaijan has also announced that it will be closing all Russian language schools in the country, so Russia's influence in this region is being reduced to a minimum. Of course, right now in Moscow they insist that Azerbaijan isn't going anywhere because Azerbaijan is very economically tied to Russia. They say Baku is too dependent on Moscow, so where else could Baku go? But here Erdogan can play a very smart card to his advantage. Azerbaijan has always been referred to as Russia's junior partner, implying that Baku relies heavily on Moscow. But then why is Baku acting so boldly now? What is Baku risking, and why is Baku ready to escalate? And this is where the most interesting part is hidden. The trade turnover between Russia and Azerbaijan in 2024 amounted to $4.8 billion, almost 5. Azerbaijan sold $1.2 billion in goods to Russia and purchased $3.6 billion worth of goods from them. It would seem that the dependence is obvious. In 2024, Russia ranked third among Azerbaijan's trading partners after Italy and Turkey. The main components of Russia's exports to Azerbaijan are oil, gas, petroleum products, and precious metals. Azerbaijan primarily exports fruits, vegetables, and plastics to Russia. And so, at first glance, Azerbaijan clearly depends on Russia almost critically, whereas Russia doesn't depend on Azerbaijan that much. But that's just at first glance. For example, Russian oil and gas exports through Azerbaijan have increased significantly. Do you know when? After Russia lost access to a significant part of the European market following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Therefore, the Kremlin will desperately cling to this market as there is no replacement for it. But even this is not the main point. Good relations with Baku are crucial to Moscow, particularly in areas affected by international sanctions. For example, Azerbaijan is among the countries through which Russia can receive dual-use goods that are necessary for its military-industrial complex, after the start of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. Turkey has almost doubled its purchases of dual-use goods from the West and supplies these goods to a number of Russia's neighboring countries, including Azerbaijan. At the same time, as the newspaper discovered in its investigation, Azerbaijan does not reflect comparable import volumes in its statistics. That is, the products seem to get lost somewhere. In other words, Turkey buys them, transfers them to Azerbaijan, but Azerbaijan does not record them anywhere. That's it, they disappear. Most likely all these products end up in Russia. In addition, Azerbaijan is now critically important for Russia for the transit of goods in trade with Iran and the countries of the Persian Gulf, because it is through Azerbaijan that Moscow moves goods along the north-south transport corridor. This is a railway route connecting Russia with the Indian Ocean through Iran. Increasing gas trade is also on the agenda. At the beginning of the year, there was also a discussion about an option where Azerbaijan would increase its gas supplies to the European Union through Ukraine's gas transportation system, while for its own domestic consumption, it would purchase the corresponding amount of gas from Russia. So it's a win-win. Now just imagine if Azerbaijan closes all these loopholes for Moscow, even for just a month, just for 1 month. For the Kremlin, that would be a disaster. That's why Erdogan and Aliyev can now confidently implement any projects they want, and Moscow won't even make a sound in response. Only those Kremlin propagandists will be shouting about Azerbaijani Nazis, nothing more. In the past, Moscow could dictate the terms there when it had access to almost all markets in the world. But now Moscow is more dependent on Azerbaijan than Azerbaijan is on Moscow. That's why I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.